Welcome, everyone. We are here for another episode of Let's Talk TSW. And I am here today with Dr. Laura Wheeler. She is a naturopathic doctor, and she's coming in from Australia. She also happens to be someone who went through TSW herself, so she really understands this condition in our community. And I'm just so excited to talk to you today, Laura. I wanted to kind of pass it over to you and let you introduce a little bit more of yourself, the work that you do in naturopathy, and also how you came to decide to go into this field of medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always had eczema as a child. I was the allergy prone kid, a lot of food sensitivities. I had anaphylaxis. During my childhood years, did use steroids. I'd go to the GP, and that was kind of all we knew at that time. So was on a lot of topical steroids, but also on oral steroids for pretty severe asthma. So kind of went along like that throughout my life. And then when I hit 20, I had quite a bad allergic reaction, or what I thought was an allergic reaction at the time. But I think it was at the point where my body was just really withdrawing from the steroids because I went off them. I was put on prednisolone for about 6 months, on and off. And I started experiencing what wasn't my usual eczema. So, as we know, that typical kind of big flush, the red sleeves, I was getting temperature dysregulation. I was very highly stressed. I was suffering from insomnia. And I'd actually be going to work for 4 hours at the time. I had a part-time job, coming home and just sleeping for the rest of the day and the rest of the night. So I knew something wasn't quite right. I think first I might have found Itsan, and also originally this was back in 2015, so quite a long time ago now, so there wasn't many resources. I originally found Itsan and also one of the Facebook groups, and was looking through other people's experiences and thinking, wow, I think this is what I'm going through. So on the 5th of April, so I think it's been 11 years last week for me,
Wow.
TSW, yep. So on the
Amazing.
5th of April 2015, I stopped steroids, and I really didn't know what I was in for at the time. Had the burning, the flushing, worsening insomnia, really, really struggled. And I went through about 18 months of severe steroid withdrawal. I was actually bedbound at the time and only 20 years old. So it was a very difficult time, very young, and really didn't know what was going on with my body because often I'd go to, the hospital because I was so unwell, or I'd go to a GP and they just didn't know what to do with me and would just say, look, I think steroids are the only option. So I'm really lucky, and grateful that I was persistent at that time and I had kind of a good community behind me, and kept kind of going forward with that. And eventually, I ended up looking into alternative medicine. So I was always interested in naturopathy as a kid. My mum used to take me to a naturopath. And because I wasn't finding much luck with conventional medicine, I was looking elsewhere. Because I wasn't working and I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, I stumbled into naturopathy and decided, look, I'm pretty bedbound at the moment. I can't go into uni. What can I do online that's going to be helpful? So I started my naturopathy degree online. And yeah, with all that research, and as you probably have experienced yourself, those hours and hours and hours of looking on Google and researching forums on what to do with myself, I eventually stumbled into naturopathy and yeah, got into that. And then I graduated a couple of years ago and started specializing in topical steroid withdrawal and
Amazing.
chronic eczema. Yeah.
Yeah, good. I'm so glad they have you there in Melbourne, right? Is this where you
Yeah,
live?
in Melbourne. So I'm based in
Yeah.
Melbourne, which is really nice. I work online, so I see some international clients as well, mostly in the US and the UK.
Mhm.
And I do work alongside an integrative doctor down here that kind of supports any scripts and things because I think it's important to have that co-managed care as well.
Yeah, and we'll
Yeah.
get into that a little bit more as we go in here. But I wanted to ask you too, how does that differ from Western, Eastern, and holistic medicine?
Yeah. So naturopathy is a natural healing therapy and it really focuses on stimulating the body's innate healing ability. So rather than just treating the symptoms, we're looking at the person as a whole person and a whole body, not just the sum of its parts, I suppose. So
Mhm.
my goal is to really get to the underlying root cause of what's going on. We do use a lot of herbal medicine, to support that, nutritional medicine as well, diet, lifestyle advice. But I do also use a lot of evidence-based testing, like functional testing, whether or not that be gut microbiome testing or oats
Mhm.
testing or mold testing. So it's a bit of a mix, but Yeah, more so looking at the body as a whole body and holistically, rather than just treating the symptoms.
Thank you for that. And you said that you work with an integrative doctor, which I thought was really interesting. When do you refer patients to them? Um, is it when they don't respond to certain diets or lifestyle changes or whatever? Can you kind of
Mhm.
give us a little bit more of
Yeah.
what your typical treatment plan is for TSW?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with TSW, because it can be quite debilitating and life altering, sometimes patients do need, further investigation. So whether or not that be blood testing to look into different inflammatory markers, but also scripts to support, sleep, histamine. A lot of my patients are dealing with something called MCAS, which is mast cell activation syndrome, which basically means we have an overproduction of something called mast cells that release histamine. And a lot of our patients will know that because that's why we're itchy, red, etc., and have many allergies. So sometimes they might look into a mast cell stabilizing medication or just need that further medical support at the same time. Um, I think the way I treat TSW, it really depends on what stage they're at. So I think in the initial stage, as we know, there's that big nitric oxide flush that happens, where there's burning and heat and temperature dysregulation. And a lot of the time there, we're trying to calm down that inflammation. So there's certain herbs that reduce nitric oxide in the skin. We also want to look at the nerve endings. So often when our skin is really thin, we have these open nerve endings, and that's why our skin is so sensitive and we can feel nerve zings and nerve pain and be very sensitive to touch. So calming down the nervous system, regulating cortisol as well, because often if we've had cortisone our whole lives, we are then, when we go off it, going to have a bit of withdrawal. So often we can have very low cortisol levels and then titrating up to high cortisol levels, which can very much affect our stress response. So really looking with the nervous system at the same time. I do look into chronic infections that are driving the issue. So I do have a subset of patients that are more prone to fungal infections or prone to staph infections. And I think that's really important to address because often that's what's keeping that cycle going. And it's actually causing more T cell activation in the skin, just having those infections on the skin. So it can actually drive inflammation, and prevent us from really seeing improvement. Um, and then with the skin barrier, it's just all about accelerating that skin barrier growth. So a lot of my patients do things like cap therapy, which I'm sure you've heard of, red light therapy. There's nutrients as well that are really supportive for rebuilding the lipid barrier in the skin. But really just looking at the body as, yeah, a holistic machine, basically. We have to treat all of it. It's not just the skin, it's often infections, it's often, supporting detox pathways to make sure that we can actually move toxins through the body and also supporting any inflammation and our immune system as well, because our immune system is so overactive, it's almost like we need to calm it all down.
Yep. Yes, I agree with you. I wanted
Yeah.
to ask, as far as the fungal infections and staph infections, is this something that can be treated herbally, or does that need a pharmaceutical drug
Yeah.
to take care of? Yeah, I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, so often, depending on the severity of it, I will often refer to the integrative doctor to look into antifungal treatment or antibiotics if it's quite severe. Because as you know, these infections, especially the staph infections, can be very severe, and there is a bit of a risk of, septicemia and things like that. So we've got to be really careful about that. But I
Mhm.
do use herbs predominantly. I think with the fungal side of things, one of my telltale signs that maybe fungus is causing a bit of a problem is the presentation of the skin. So often it's defined borders that you can have kind of circular raised patches, specifically under the arms, in the groin area, and on the chest. And if they've had mold exposure, that can often lead to fungal issues, and a fungal overgrowth in the body. So in that circumstance, I do use antifungal herbs, but sometimes my patients do find improvement from pharmaceutical antifungals as well.
So I'm interested with about mold, if you'll talk a little bit more about that, because I see this more and more in our groups, mold exposure that's either exacerbating or driving a lot of what people are experiencing. Is there a certain presentation if you are responding to mold as opposed to, say, you just mentioned a fungal infection could be in certain areas of your body or raised? Can you give us a little bit of indication about, how would you identify that as a mold problem? Do you do an allergy test or is it something that you can see? Just,
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we know that there's been mold exposure, I've actually had many patients, I'm seeing a bit of a pattern where they've
mm,
noticed their skin really being exacerbated and worsening when they move into a place that there's no mold that they can see it.
mm,
So one option is doing house testing, so getting a building biologist in and looking whether or not mold is a problem. In terms of detecting mold in the body, you can actually do a test from RN Labs, I think it is in Australia, and I'm sure. I think there's My Myco Lab in the US that
mm.
looks at actual strains of mold and strains of mold spores in the body, and it can tell us
Oh,
which ones are there. There's
mm,
also something called oats testing, so organic acids testing, that
mhm,
looks at a combination of fungal markers, so not specific strains of mold, but fungal markers, as well as bacterial markers, and also
mhm.
how we detox. So sometimes I do that one specifically because it can tell us a little bit more about the full picture.
Mm,
But often, if I know there's been a mold exposure, I'm seeing the symptoms, so they might have sinus congestion, chronic cough, lung inflammation. I do often pop them on a bit of a mold protocol anyway, which is essentially an antifungal protocol. And I do
mm.
find that really, really benefits their skin.
Okay, wow. Okay, that's great to know. Are you seeing different types of TSW? Really curious about that because as I
Yeah.
was talking with our traditional medicine doctor, she was saying she is seeing this. And
Mm.
I would love to hear from you if there are certain subsets of TSW you're seeing, and then how do you approach each one of those, if so?
Absolutely. So I know we were talking about this on another call, and I'm very
Yeah.
interested to have a chat to her about that.
Hmm.
I am starting to see different subsets. I think there's obviously the initial phase of TSW that I think most people do go through, which is that vasodilation of the blood vessels. So when we're taking steroids, we get this vasoconstriction of our blood vessels, which is why our skin clears up. We get this reduction in redness, we get a reduction in inflammation. As soon as we go off them, that's when we get the vasodilation, and that's that red sleeve, typical red skin syndrome. So I think that's one side of it, and that's where the temperature dysregulation comes in, um, and often the insomnia. There are a couple of subsets that I've seen further from that. So one is definitely the infection picture. I do see a lot of the time staph driving a lot of that inflammation. So, as I was saying before, with staph, it can actually trigger T cell activation in the skin and just keep that cycle going. So often that's a problem. Then I would say there's the fungal subset. So one interesting thing is if people are on Dupixent and they're noticing they're getting those facial flares, often those facial flares are actually fungal flares. And that's a telltale sign for me that, okay, I think that there's a fungal issue here. And if there's an infection kind of subtype that's driving that inflammation, we can't really see much improvement until we've cleared that out. So I think that's an important one. The other subset that I've seen that's quite interesting is vascular dysregulation. So I've been doing a little bit of research into this, and it's whether or not there's an issue with genetics, or some people have a condition, a connective tissue disorder called EDS. I don't know if you've heard of EDS, which really causes a dysregulation in connective tissue and an issue with connective tissue. So it makes it harder for us to rebuild tissue. And often those are the people that I'm finding have a lot of edema and swelling in the legs. They might be prone to things like varicose veins, issues with microcirculation and circulation. And often that leads to significant staph issues and staph infections on the legs. I've had a few patients who can barely walk because their legs and their feet are so swollen. And I often do wonder what's driving that vascular dysregulation because I think, yes, it's a part of TSW, but I do see people that are more severe than others. So I wonder if there's some sort of connective tissue disorder going on there, whether or not there's some sort of infection driving it as well that's blocking our lymphatic detoxification. Um, and then I guess the other subset would be more so barrier repair. So I do see many patients that don't actually have a lot of the flushing, the redness, but just this very consistent flaking that's very difficult to improve. And I think at that point, we look at, lipid repair. So we look at omega-3s, we look at GLAs, things that are going to nourish the skin barrier, and also certain nutrients that nourish the skin barrier as well. So there's one called L-histidine. I'm not sure if you've looked into
Mhm.
L-histidine before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It is a amino acid that's really great at supporting the filaggrin gene. So in eczema, not all of us, but often we have a mutation in that filaggrin gene. And that means that we're not able to rebuild our skin barrier sufficiently. So often we're more prone to dry skin.
Mm.
Once we start actually supporting that with L-histidine, some of my patients seem to really, really improve, but
Mm.
not all my patients do. So it's very interesting. We kind of trial it.
Mm.
So I guess in terms of subsets, that's what I would say in a nutshell. Has there been
Mhm.
any other ones that you have distinguished?
Well, I know there's a lot of talk around, erythrodermic, and some
Mm.
people even call it erythrodermic AD, atopic dermatitis. This was the big debate, in dermatology. But so people have more redness, spreading redness. And then, I've heard some say it's either pustular or papule, that they'll
Mhm.
have, on the skin. So, yeah, part of me wonders, is it partly to do with the phases of the skin healing, and then we're seeing the skin manifesting different symptoms and signs at different times. Just like
Yeah.
you were talking about the profuse shedding and the snowing, what people call, I feel tends to be at the end of the TSW recovery period, where in the beginning it's the real red, real flushing, oozing, burning, all of that. And then it tends to go down. Even the elephant wrinkles that people have tend to like
Mm.
lessen over
Mm.
time, but you can still have a lot of profuse shedding in the
Absolutely.
end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I wanted to ask you too, because I get questions all the time around fungal infections and the use of Dupixent. Have you seen people on Dupixent being able to be helped in that regard with the fungal infections on their face and neck? So I guess my bigger question is, are they able to maintain that treatment by just adding on something to take care of the fungal piece? And then my other question is, once people get off of Dupixent, I've also heard that they can have continuing recurrent infections with fungal. And is that something that you are seeing as well? And then how would you address that? So I
Yeah,
guess three
absolutely.
questions.
No, that's okay. Yeah, absolutely. So I think with Dupixent, the important thing to note is when we're seeing that fungal issue on the skin, it's often because that Malaysia yeast on there is already there. It's not that the Dupixent is causing it, it's the fact that it's already there. And what Dupixent does is it makes us more sensitive to the yeast on the skin, which is why we're having more flare-ups. I
Mhm.
do see that once people titrate off Dupixent, eventually the fungal flares just go away. However, I do have a lot of patients that do well on Dupixent apart from the face flares, and they've really cleared their body and they find it really helpful during those initial stages. So, in that sense, there is ways to reduce the fungal overgrowth. On the skin, hypochlorous acid, a really simple one. So,
Mhm.
hypochlorous acid is basically just a spray that we can use on our skin that helps the pH. So, it causes our pH to be more acidic. With eczema and TSW, it's more alkaline. So that prevents infection growth on the skin. And I have seen patients just using that, after the shower a couple of times a day, really prevent that fungal overgrowth on the skin. Some of my patients have tried antifungal creams, the Nizoral shampoos, although they are quite abrasive to the skin. But otherwise, herbally, I do often treat that fungal overgrowth herbally as well. That's a
Mhm.
bit of a sign that there is an underlying fungal overgrowth that's driving those symptoms. So
Mhm.
it's definitely possible to reduce it while on Dupixent. And then when you do go off it, it generally does subside. It's
Mhm.
more so looking at why there's a fungal issue in the first place.
Mhm.
Maybe mold, maybe just the fact that we have used steroids and steroids have suppressed the immune system. And whenever the immune system is suppressed, we are going to get more of a candida fungal overgrowth anyway.
Mhm.
So it's looking at
Yeah.
that, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so I'd love to kind of switch the conversation a little bit to talk about gut health because I
Yeah.
think many of us have realized this is a really big piece of getting
Mm.
better, staying better. Could you tell us a little bit how gut health is related to eczema and TSW?
Absolutely. So Gut health, it's really important because 80% of our immune system lies in our gut.
Mm,
So we have an ecosystem in our gut, a gut microbiome that has good and bad bacteria. If
mm,
that is out of balance, that's going to significantly affect our immune system. And
mm,
that's why a lot of us have food sensitivities and issues with our gut who have eczema. Now, when I treat eczema, not TSW, the gut is a very large focus of that. So it's looking at inflammation. You've probably heard of leaky gut before. With leaky gut, we can get toxins passing through into our bloodstream, and that causes inflammation that comes out in our skin. Bit different with TSW, I think. Topical steroid withdrawal, I find many of my patients don't improve significantly from gut work because it's a completely different thing that's going on. We need to be looking at the skin barrier, we need to be looking at the immune dysregulation,
mm,
and all of those other issues going on with vasculation, etc.
mm,
But I think with eczema, the gut plays a big role. So often I'll order functional gut testing, where we look at the gut microbiome, we look at any gut markers that might signify inflammation. We can look at whether or not we're secreting enough stomach acid to break our food down, any imbalances in our gut, like parasites that might be contributing to eczema. I do see parasites as being quite a significant contributor to eczema, especially in kids. So when we get blood testing done, often their IgE is through the roof, and their eosinophils, which is our white blood cell marker, is also high. So both of those can be markers of parasites in the body.
mhm,
I think IgE can also be just a marker of infection and immune activation and inflammation. So, yeah,
mhm,
definitely treating parasites, treating any kind of gut infections that are going on, and just making sure we're diversifying our gut microbiome. So, we're increasing all those good bacterias that are going to form
mhm,
most of our immune system with prebiotics and probiotics and a diversified diet. When we look at histamine, for example, that obviously is a very, very big part of eczema and TSW. We
mhm,
actually break histamine down in the gut. So if our gut isn't functioning and our gut's inflamed, often that's when we can see our histamine bucket increasing. So that's also a very
mhm.
important part of it.
Is there a way that you would recommend for people to deal with the histamine problem?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways. First off, looking at why it's happening in the first place. So, is it gut dysfunction? And if so, we need to look at the gut. The other one is there mast cell activation? So that's when, our mast cells are really secreting excess histamine because our body feels like there's a threat.
Mm,
Often that's more because of chronic infections like mold,
mhm,
trauma, excess stress. But in
mm,
terms of managing histamine, some of my patients find the low histamine diet helpful. I don't like to put anyone on a long-term diet, especially when they're dealing with TSW because it's very difficult to manage. I guess that can control symptoms, but there
mm,
are definitely ways that we can help break down histamine in the body. So there's enzymes like DAO that you can take before food that breaks histamine down. There's
mm,
herbs that we can take that really reduce histamine in the body as well. So it's a
mm,
combination of, I suppose, managing the histamine, managing the symptoms, and also figuring out why it's happening in the first place.
mm. Okay, thank you for that. That was great. Is there any food that you would recommend people in TSW avoid?
Yes, that's also a difficult question. So I think it depends on the person. In a perfect world, we would be completely reducing inflammatory foods. I
Hmm.
know there's a lot of talk about reducing or removing gluten and dairy. I think dairy definitely is a big trigger for many eczema and TSW patients because it is quite overactivating to the immune system. But I also look at the patient. If they know they have known food intolerances, I say stay away from them. And I generally recommend an anti-inflammatory diet. So whether or not that is reducing or removing gluten and dairy for the time being while we kind of reduce that inflammation, or just picking, more friendly options like our sourdoughs and our ryes and things that are easy for our body to break down. Same with dairy. So looking at reducing our processed forms of those foods. And then
Hmm.
I think with TSW, it's all about ensuring we have enough nutrients because we're losing so many nutrients
Hmm.
and water and hydration and electrolytes through our skin because our
Hmm.
skin's working on overtime to try and repair that barrier. So I
Hmm.
always recommend some omega-3s, making sure that we're getting enough fish in, making sure we're getting foods that are rich in zinc and B12, and just diverse range of vegetables where we can. But in terms of avoiding foods, I would say it's definitely based on the patient, but I have seen some connections. Many of my patients find low histamine diets helpful for them for symptoms.
Okay, all right, that's
Yeah.
good. Okay. And you just touched on this, as
Yeah.
like the mast cell activation. Can you talk about unresolved trauma and how that
Mhm.
could be playing into eczema and TSW and maybe even
Yeah.
perpetuating it.
Absolutely, yeah. So trauma is very significant, and it's actually when I take a patient's medical history, I really try and dig deep and see if there is any kind of emotional trauma that's occurred.
Mhm.
Because often I find it's a big trigger, and it might even be the starting point of a lot of these health issues and health concerns. With trauma, unfortunately, we're left in a state of fight or flight. So our nervous system is very hypervigilant and overreactive. When
Mhm.
our body's in a state of fight or flight, we can't actually focus on healing. It's very, very hard for our body to use the resources that it has to heal our skin barrier and to regulate our immune system. It also increases inflammatory cells like T cells and cytokines, which is going to drive a lot of those symptoms that we're experiencing in eczema and TSW.
Mhm.
So I think if there's already been some trauma before we go through the TSW, that's
Mhm.
definitely something that we need to address. I think then we have to look at medical trauma from topical steroid withdrawal as well.
Yeah.
So that feeling of not being validated, I do see a lot of patients who have significant trauma surrounded by that.
Mhm.
And also just, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there.
You've seen people with medical trauma as well from being dismissed by doctors. I think there's also that aspect of unpredictability around this because we don't have a
Yeah.
timeline. We don't really have like a silver bullet of a treatment. There are so many unknowns on top of the physical suffering. It's just a lot. And then how your life is upended. I think many people in our community have PTSD to some degree and are just really struggling. Even when you get past it, and how do I reintegrate into life again, right? There's like a lot of fear around that, just
Mhm.
because TSW just strips you down to like the very core of who you are. So have
Mhm.
you found certain therapies or certain things, tools helpful for
Yeah.
people to, first of all, I think like to your point, to the thing that could possibly have triggered eczema in the first place might be some form of trauma. Wow, can't get my words out. But is there a way to help people kind of get back into those places and see, is there something unresolved that I need to deal with? And how do we do that productively, et cetera? So how do you guide your patients through that?
Absolutely. So I think trauma therapy is a very, very important part of treatment. Often, or more often than not, I'm recommending patients go and see certain trauma therapists. I
Mhm.
love EMDR, which is a form of eye rapid movement that looks at processing trauma and different triggers in the body and neutralizing them so that our nervous system feels safe.
Mhm.
So often we're finding that with TSW patients, as soon as they're stressed, they will itch. It's just almost the itch scratch cycle. It's
Yeah.
a stress coping mechanism.
Mhm.
And some of my patients even find hypnotherapy really productive as well, because a lot of my patients who are actually not finding they have many skin concerns anymore are still itching as soon as they're stressed, and they're asking me, "How can I break this cycle? Like I just
Yeah.
keep itching anytime that I'm feeling triggered."
Mhm.
So I do have some that go to hypnotherapy, and there are actually a couple of practitioners that specialize in eczema and TSW that do
Really?
hypnotherapy. Yeah,
And how does
absolutely.
it actually work? Do you know?
Hypnotherapy. Yeah, so
Mhm.
it's more so looking at taking you back. It's really in the mind. So it's taking you into a subconscious where you're going through a certain memory, for example, and you're neutralizing that memory by, say, tapping, for example. So that's one outlet that you can use. So when
Mhm.
you're tapping on various areas of your skin, on your face, there's certain acupuncture points that are calming the immune system down and are calming the nervous system down so that
Mhm.
when we are finding that we're reliving a memory or going through a certain traumatic memory, it's actually neutralizing it in real time so that the nervous system isn't getting triggered. So I do find that very, very helpful. But EMDR is a really, really good one too, because that's really looking at reducing those triggers and reducing the emotions somatically in the body, because we do store a lot of that stress and anxiety in the body as well, and we need to release that. Because if we're constantly in fight or flight and our nervous system is very hypervigilant, it is very difficult for us to heal.
Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I remember after I had been exposed to eczema herpeticum and I was hospitalized, I was just pumped full of antivirals, and I think it kind of triggered me into getting panic attacks. And it started happening pretty regularly, especially when I was driving, which was very scary. And I found just intuitively, I had a big drink, like a cold drink, an icy drink, and I just kept putting my hand on the back of my neck, and it would get me to calm down. I found out years later that that is one of the things that they tell you to do to calm the vagus nerve. When you're stuck in that fight or flight, you put
Mhm.
cold on the back of your neck. I thought, so
Wow.
interesting to me that just my body knew what to do.
Yeah, how interesting that it was intuitive.
Yes, right? But
Yeah.
learning some of these just exercises can be so, so helpful because you just have to recognize number one, oh, I'm tense, my shoulders are up, or, I'm feeling really stressed inside. Just recognizing that first and then dealing with it, addressing it, and doing something about it, deep breathing or whatever else can be so, so helpful. So
Absolutely.
thank you for
Yeah.
sharing
There's
that.
an app called the Tapping Solution app that I get a lot of my patients to use. And that's what we were talking about before, just the tapping on certain points that calms the nervous system down while
Wow.
we're being triggered. So even when they're in a flare, when they're feeling like they're very anxious, they're having a panic attack, that can often reset the nervous system and calm them down.
Wow, that's so good. And another thing that I found was helpful for the reframing of some of those really just raw emotions or that trauma was when I wrote. And when I wrote my book, I actually
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
even think of that as being a
Mm.
direct benefit, but having to
Mm.
go back into those painful memories and reframe it in a way that was going to be productive and meaningful. And it just
Mm.
took the pain out of it. And
Yeah.
we talk about that a lot with Itzan, turning your pain into purpose. It just happened. And I'm like, wow. Now, when I
Yeah.
think about those things, I don't get all like amped up or upset. It
Mm.
just comes and goes. And so I think
Mm.
journaling and writing is really helpful too, for some of that.
Something about putting that on paper and kind of disconnecting it from you is really helpful, I
Yeah.
think, as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I have one last question for you. This
Yeah.
has been really great. Actually went very fast. But what would you say to those who are in TSW right now? Sometimes, and I'm
Mm.
sure you probably felt this way too. I know I did. Maybe I'm the anomaly. Maybe I'm never going to get better, and I don't know how I can keep doing this. When is this going to end? Just that feeling of powerlessness, of
Mhm.
just feeling very isolated in the condition, because even if you have family around, no one understands what you're going through except really you and people who have gone through this too. It's
Mhm.
just the gravity of it is very, very difficult to bear for a long period of time. What would you say to people who are watching this today, who are stuck in that right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would say that there's a lot of support out there. There's definitely a great community that ITSAN's built. There's a lot of practitioners that are now recognizing TSW and able to offer you more support, not just in conventional medicine, but in naturopathy and
Mm,
TCM practitioners, in trauma-based therapy. So I think try and access those where you can, because there is a lot more that you can do than kind of let that withdrawal pass in just easing your symptoms and getting to the bottom of really what's going on. And I
mm,
think I would just say it does get better, which
mm,
is a really difficult thing because I think when I was suffering from it in my 20s, I'd spend, 10 plus hours in the bath each day. And I remember I have distinct memories of just, looking down and thinking, this is never going to end. Like I'm never going to get out of this. This is my life. But it did, and it was slow, but it did. And I think creating purpose in suffering is so important. I think that's been very, very helpful for me in turning it into something positive. So doing that
mm.
where you can is significant as well.
Yeah. Going to school and learning this form of medicine, and now you can help other people. That was extremely productive.
Yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great. But I think the other thing is finding joy in the little things. And I'm sure you found this as well. But
Mm,
once I really got through the depths of TSW, I did find so much joy in the little things, like being able to go out for coffee,
mhm.
being able to see friends, being able to travel, all of those little things that we couldn't do once. And those things will come, and
Mhm.
you will appreciate them so much more when they
Yes.
do.
It's so true, right? I felt when I finally was, because I was bedridden a year and a half, when I was finally
Mhm.
able to get out, I remember my first sunset that I had seen in
Yeah.
probably almost 2 years. And it just
Yeah.
washed over me, and I was just like in awe. These things that we've
Mm,
taken for granted our whole lives. I mean, there's just miracles all around us and just so much goodness.
absolutely.
to be
Yeah.
had and enjoyed, and you want to milk it for all it's worth. That's how I felt. Even about being
Oh,
productive, I want to work, work, work. It felt so good to work
yeah.
and be out of bed
Yeah.
and a bathtub. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's you kind of have to go by degree and not take on too much. I found that as well.
Yeah.
I actually started a job that I was able to do from home. All I needed was my phone and a computer, and that was so good to have my mind focused on something beyond my skin, but
Mhm.
slowly easing back into life again. It's a journey, but yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like it's been a backhanded gift in its own way, where it's made me
Absolutely.
see life differently, relationships differently, all of that. So yeah.
Appreciate the little things, but I think it's also very important to make sure that we are knowing our limits. That's what I
Yeah.
learned. I think beforehand I would just go, go, go. I'd keep going. I'd run on empty. Now
Mhm.
I'm very cautious of my limits because I know there is a
Yeah.
limit. So I think
Yes.
that's a blessing in disguise, actually.
Agree. I totally agree with you on that. Yeah, it's good. A good practice. Well, this
Absolutely.
has been wonderful, Laura, and I cannot wait to have you here in the United States at our summit coming. It's
Yes.
going to be so good. And just appreciate the time that you've given us today and all that you're doing to help TSW patients in Australia.
Oh, thank you.
So
Thank you
until
so
next
much. I really
time.
appreciate it. I appreciate all the time and I love what It's doing and some
Mm,
really exciting things in the mix. So, yeah, very
yes,
excited.
lots of good stuff coming. All right, thank you.
Thank you.